Italy has always lived in the tension between myth and reality. Its hills, plains, and coastlines are littered with the echoes of empires, the whispers of poets, and the laughter of inventors who dared to dream differently. The peninsula, long a crossroads of cultures, has produced stories so strange that they feel like legend. Yet each is rooted in fact. From the earliest days of human settlement to the modern age of supercars and high-speed trains, Italy's history is a kaleidoscope of the extraordinary, the whimsical, and the daring. Before the marble streets of Florence and the sun-drenched canals of Venice, Italy's name itself carried a touch of the outlandish. Some ancient sources whisper that the land was named after a king, Italus, whose people revered young calves as sacred symbols of life and prosperity. To call the peninsula Italy was, quite literally, to speak of the land of calves. A pastoral, almost childlike homage to the very animals that grazed its hills. One can imagine small tribes tending cattle under the blazing sun, ritually lifting young bulls to honor Italus's legacy, unaware that their devotion would echo in the name of a nation millennia later. And then there are the twin founders of Rome, Romulus and Remus. Their story begins in abandonment and unfolds in a theater of myth. Infants cast into the Tiber are said to have been suckled by a she-wolf, with a woodpecker bringing them sustenance under the watchful eyes of the gods. Eventually found by a humble herdsman, they grew into figures of ambition and cunning. In a world that prized strength above all, Romulus would later slay his brother, Remus, and establish the city that would dominate the ancient world. It is a tale both brutal and tender, a story in which the natural and the supernatural intermingle, setting a tone of wonder and terror that would come to define Roman culture. By the time Rome had expanded from a small city-state to an empire spanning 3 continents, the Italian peninsula had become the stage for spectacles unparalleled in human imagination. Emperor Titus, for instance, inaugurated the Colosseum with games lasting 100 days, filling the arena with thousands of gladiators and wild beasts from across the empire. Lions and elephants, rhinoceroses and leopards were driven into the sandy pit, their roars mingling with the cheers of tens of thousands of spectators. On the first day alone, an astonishing 5,000 animals were slain, and the echoes of the amphitheater carried tales of power, excess, and spectacle. In these grand moments, Italy's capacity for the extraordinary became tangible, its legacy etched not just in stone, but in awe. Italy's genius for invention and adaptation extended beyond mere spectacle. Julius Caesar, in the midst of civil unrest and political chaos, reformed the Roman calendar, introducing the solar-based Julian calendar that would eventually evolve into the system still used today. He lengthened 1 year to 445 days to realign months with the sun, a maneuver of both practical necessity and sheer audacity. Time itself, it seemed, could be molded by human ambition in Italy, a nation where engineering, artistry, and political cunning often walked hand in hand. The Middle Ages brought their own brand of ingenuity and eccentricity. Italy's city-states, each a jewel of commerce and culture, were crucibles of innovation. Florence, Venice, and Bologna became centers not only of wealth, but of daring ideas. Double-entry bookkeeping, eyeglasses, and universities that would educate generations of thinkers. In monasteries perched atop misty mountains, monks labored over manuscripts, preserving the wisdom of the ancients when much of Europe had fallen into disarray. These silent scribes became the custodians of civilization, their meticulous hands transmitting knowledge across centuries. Even daily life in Italy bore quirks that would puzzle outsiders. Consider dining. The fork, so ordinary today, was once an instrument of scandal and moral scrutiny. Introduced to Venice by a Byzantine princess in 1071, it was denounced by some church authorities as unnatural. For decades, Italians twirled pasta with their fingers, viewed their hands as the proper instruments of nourishment, and resisted utensils with a mixture of suspicion and pride. Such customs reflect Italy's unique rhythm, a nation that balances respect for tradition with a capacity for reinvention, where even the simplest act, eating, carries centuries of history. Italy's cultural oddities extend into the arts and public life. Pinocchio, the wooden puppet whose nose grows with every lie, first appeared not as a celebrated novel but in serialized installments of a children's newspaper. The story's quirky origin mirrors Italy's broader propensity for turning the mundane into the extraordinary. Likewise, the iconic Trevi fountain in Rome is more than a tourist attraction. It is a ritual in motion. Visitors toss coins to secure their return, collectively contributing thousands of euros daily, a testament to the nation's intertwining of myth, ritual, and modern life. The Italian love of spectacle, myth, and whimsy continued into the modern era. British sailors may have introduced football to the peninsula, but Mussolini transformed it into a tool of national pride. Venice adapted to flooding with raised walkways, a practical yet almost theatrical response to nature's whims. In Maranello, Ferrari engines are hand-assembled and signed by individual artisans, merging industrial precision with personal craftsmanship. Across centuries, Italy demonstrates a consistent theme, a capacity to blend the functional with the extraordinary, the practical with the poetic. Italy is not merely a country, but as a living story. Every hill, canal, piazza, and ruin tells a story where fact mingles with legend. From the sacred calves of Italus to the hand-signed engines of Ferrari, Italy's history oscillates between the mundane and the miraculous. Each story is a portal into a world where human imagination meets circumstance, and where the peculiar becomes a hallmark of identity. The tales that follow delve deeper into this history. They explore 30 outlandish facts drawn from Italy's past, organized by era and theme. Some are tales of empire, conquest, and spectacle. Others are quirks of daily life, cuisine, and invention. Together, they paint a portrait of a nation that has always defied expectations, that has always found the extraordinary in the ordinary, and that continues to fascinate those willing to look closely. Before Italy became a nation of emperors, artists, popes, and revolutionaries, it was imagined first as a landscape of herds and old words carried on the wind. Before the peninsula was stitched into a single state, its southern reaches were home to tribes whose world moved with cattle, pasture, season, and sun. In that early world, the name Italy seems to have grown from an ancient root connected to calves or young bulls, a detail that gives the country's name a surprisingly pastoral beginning. It is a name that does not sound imperial at all. It sounds rural, almost tender, as though the land itself was first known not for marble or legions, but for the lowing of livestock in warm valleys. One can almost picture the scene in that distant age. Hills roll softly under the Mediterranean light. Dust rises from the hooves of animals crossing narrow paths. Small communities gather around the rhythms of agriculture and ritual, and the strength of the young bull becomes a symbol of fertility, power, and continuity. In such a setting, a nation would not yet exist, but a name would. That name would survive every conquest, every migration, every boundary drawn and redrawn by later hands. Italy would endure long after its earliest meaning had faded into legend, carrying with it a memory of a time when the peninsula was not a political idea, but a living landscape of fields, flocks, and ancient devotion. That is part of the charm of Italian history. Even its name seems to come from a world half real and half mythic, where symbols mattered as much as borders. The country that would one day give the world Renaissance frescoes, Roman roads, and Ferrari engines began in its oldest remembered name, with something as humble as a calf. Rome's origin story begins not with a triumphal parade, but with abandonment, danger, and the unlikely mercy of an animal. The legend of Romulus and Remus is one of the most famous foundation myths in the world, and it is also one of the most dramatic. The twins were said to be born into political danger, cast aside to die, and then rescued by a she-wolf who nursed them as though they were her own. In the shadow of the Tiber, where reeds bent in the breeze and the river moved with cold patience, the future founders of Rome were supposedly found clinging to life beneath a fig tree. Their survival depended on a creature that belonged neither to the household nor to the city, but to the wild edge between civilization and nature. The image is unforgettable. A wolf, watchful and severe, bends over two helpless infants. The forest and river become the cradle of a civilization that would later dominate the Mediterranean. A woodpecker is sometimes drawn into the tale as well, adding another sacred creature to the story, as if the gods themselves had sent messengers from the natural world to preserve these children for a larger fate. When a herdsman eventually discovered them, the twins were not weak and broken, but somehow marked by destiny. They grew strong. They learned to lead. They gathered followers. And then, in one of the most unsettling moments in all foundation myths, they turned ambition into violence. Romulus would ultimately kill Remus, and from that act, Rome would be born. The power of the story lies in its contrasts. It is both tender and brutal, both animal and political, both a miracle and a warning. Rome begins as a city nourished by the wild, raised by creatures of the riverbank, and then stained by brotherhood broken. That is why the story has lasted so long. It does not merely explain where Rome came from. It suggests what Rome was always meant to be: resilient, ruthless, and destined to grow from impossible beginnings. In the mythology of Italy, few images are more enduring than the she-wolf and the twins, locked forever in the birth of an empire. When the Colosseum first opened, it did not begin quietly. It did not ease into history with a modest ceremony or a brief dedication. It erupted into public life with a spectacle so immense that it still feels almost unreal. Emperor Titus, eager to display the power of Rome and the magnificence of its imperial reach, is said to have inaugurated the great amphitheater with games that lasted 100 days. That alone would be astonishing. But the scale becomes even more dramatic when one imagines what those days contained. Gladiators, wild beasts, staged hunts, executions, and crowds so large that the roar of them may have seemed like another natural force in the city. The Colosseum itself would have glowed under the Roman sun, its outer arches pale and massive, its interior swallowing sound and turning every movement into theater. The air would have been thick with dust, sweat, animal musk, incense, and the anticipation of thousands of spectators packed into tier after tier of stone seating. Below them, the arena floor became a stage upon which the empire performed itself. Exotic animals were brought from distant provinces, dragged across seas and roads to die in front of cheering crowds. Lions from Africa, bears from northern forests, elephants from conquered lands, and other creatures few Romans would ever have seen in the wild, all entered the same space, forced into a ritual of domination that turned imperial reach into entertainment. It is easy, from a modern distance, to reduce such games to brutality alone. Yet to the Romans, they were also a language of power. 100 days of spectacle announced that Rome possessed the wealth to command the world and the confidence to display it. Every beast captured, every warrior armed, every contest staged in that vast bowl of stone declared that the empire was not fragile. It was overwhelming. It could gather the edges of the world and compress them into a single arena in the heart of the city. That is what makes the opening games so extraordinary. They were not just an event. They were a statement. The Colosseum became one of the grandest monuments ever built for public display, and its first celebrations matched its scale with terrifying brilliance. In that space, Italy revealed one of its oldest historical truths. It could make power look like pageantry, and pageantry look like destiny. In a Rome caught between chaos and conquest, Julius Caesar looked not only to the battlefield, but to the very measure of days and seasons. Before his reform, the Roman calendar had become a tangle of months, leap months, and political adjustments that left citizens, priests, and farmers alike unsure of the proper time to sow, harvest, or celebrate. Months drifted, festivals fell out of alignment, and the rhythms of the year had become unreliable. Caesar, ever the architect of order, took a daring approach. In 46 BCE, he introduced the Julian calendar, 12 months, 365 days, and an added leap year to correct the slow drift of time. To accomplish this, he stretched a single year to 445 days, a staggering adjustment that left Rome itself astonished. Streets were abuzz with conversation. Scholars debated the mechanics, priests adjusted religious rites, and citizens watched as the ancient reckoning of days gave way to a new, precise order. The reform was audacious in both scope and consequence. Time itself, in a world dominated by politics, religion, and superstition, was being bent to human design. Caesar did not merely record the days, he reshaped them. In doing so, Italy once again demonstrated its blend of intellect, audacity, and theatricality, qualities that would echo in centuries of innovation and cultural dominance. History often condenses events into images that feel almost inevitable. One thinks of Julius Caesar falling in the Senate, surrounded by friends turned conspirators. The reality, however, was stranger and more intimate. Caesar was not killed in the Senate hall, but in a theater lobby, a liminal space that bridged public ceremony and private passage. The setting was quiet, yet charged with tension. Toga-clad senators moved with pretense of formality, each concealing both dagger and intent. The floor, polished and echoing with footsteps, seemed to hold its breath. When the blade struck, the moment was immediate and chaotic, far removed from the grandeur of the Senate chamber. The assassination's location imbued the event with a surreal intimacy. Betrayal did not occur in the public eye, but in a space of transition, a corridor that symbolically mirrored the shift in Roman power. Italy's fascination with drama and irony is embodied in this event. The locus of Caesar's death reminds observers that history often unfolds in unexpected places, that the ordinary can become the extraordinary in an instant, and that even the most monumental destinies can hinge on a hallway, a threshold, and the glint of steel. Walk through a crowded Italian piazza today, and one immediately senses a symphony of motion accompanying speech. Hands punctuate every sentence, fluttering, pointing, circling, or pressing emphatically against one another. This is not mere flourish. Italy has preserved over 250 hand gestures with roots stretching back to ancient Rome, a silent language refined over centuries for negotiation, humor, admonition, and expression. Roman markets, forums, and streets thrived on this non-verbal communication. A subtle flick of the fingers might mean caution, a sharp palm thrust, outrage. Merchants, soldiers, and politicians mastered these gestures as tools of persuasion and power, allowing messages to travel across noisy crowds without uttering a single word. In the bustling cities and quiet rural towns of modern Italy, these gestures remain vibrant, blending practicality with theatricality. They are a living testament to the Italian flair for performance, a culture where movement itself is as expressive as language, and where history continues to speak through gesture as much as through text. Italy is a land where history refuses to stay buried. In the streets of Naples, Rome, and Florence, construction crews often stumble upon fragments of ancient civilizations while simply digging foundations for new buildings. Mosaics depicting Bacchic revelries, fragments of temples, or entire Roman villas occasionally emerge beneath the asphalt and modern walls, like whispers from a forgotten past. Imagine a construction site in the heart of Rome. Workers pause as chisels strike mosaic tiles embedded in centuries of earth. Dust rises, blending with the scent of modern machinery and the faint aroma of fresh bread from nearby bakeries. Archaeologists arrive, brushes and trowels in hand, unearthing scenes of daily life from thousands of years ago. Market stalls frozen in tile, the imprint of sandals on stone pathways, inscriptions that speak of names long gone. Beneath every modern street and piazza, Italy seems to guard its past jealously, reminding the present that time is layered and civilization is stacked like sediment, each era pressing upon the next. This phenomenon is more than accidental. It reflects Italy's unique dialogue between past and present, where every new project becomes an encounter with history, every excavation a conversation with the ghosts of empire. Here, the ancient never truly disappears. It waits quietly to be discovered. At the height of its power, the Roman Empire was not merely a regional force. It was a civilization that spanned 3 continents: Europe, Africa, and Asia. From the deserts of North Africa to the rugged forests of Germania. From the sun-scorched plains of Hispania to the fertile crescent of the Middle East. Rome's influence stretched further than most empires could imagine. Roads, aqueducts, and ports connected these diverse lands, forming a network that allowed soldiers, merchants, and ideas to travel vast distances with astonishing efficiency. Picture a traveler leaving the heart of Italy for Alexandria. Marble forums and villas fade into olive groves, then into arid deserts. Roman standards fly over city gates in distant lands, Latin inscriptions mark streets, and the same legal codes and social customs are enforced thousands of miles from Rome. This was the empire at its zenith, organized, complex, and astonishing in scope. Italy, as the center, radiated not just military might, but cultural influence, orchestrating a symphony of diversity that blended local customs with imperial order. The empire's expanse shows Italy's historical propensity for audacity and ambition. It was a nation capable of imagining, controlling, and sustaining complexity on a scale that few civilizations have matched. And while the Roman Empire eventually fell, its imprint on law, language, and architecture persists, leaving modern Italy standing atop a foundation of global ambition. Even after his assassination, Julius Caesar's presence in Italy was pervasive, a reminder that influence and legend often outlive mortality. Statues, coins, and inscriptions proliferated in his honor, while the Julian calendar continued to mark the rhythm of life across the empire. His reforms of governance, urban planning, and military strategy shaped the Italian peninsula for centuries, creating structures that would guide Rome and later Italy through turbulence and renewal. Walking through the Forum today, one can almost hear the echoes of Caesar's voice in debates, proclamations, and ceremonial rituals. Italian history in this respect is not linear, but layered. The decisions of a single man made over 2 millennia ago ripple through cobblestone streets and modern bureaucracy alike. Italy is a land where the past never truly recedes, and where figures like Caesar remain as tangible as the stones beneath one's feet. A living shadow that informs identity, culture, and the imagination of generations. Prior to the word university carrying the weight it does today, a group of scholars gathered in the Italian city of Bologna with a single revolutionary idea. Knowledge should be preserved, debated, and transmitted, not hoarded or hidden. In 1088, the University of Bologna opened its doors, marking the birth of what would become the oldest, continually operating university in the world. The early campus was unlike the sprawling institutions we imagine today. Scholars crowded into small halls lit by flickering torches and high windows, their voices echoing over wooden benches as they argued over law, philosophy, and the minutiae of Latin grammar. Students from across Europe traveled for months, some on foot, others on horse or boat, drawn by the promise of learning in a land steeped in history. In its corridors, scribes copied manuscripts by hand, and professors debated civil law while the sounds of city life drifted in through open windows. The University of Bologna was more than a place of study. It was a crucible for ideas that would ripple across Europe for centuries. Law students refined the principles that would influence governance far beyond the city walls. And the university's emphasis on debate and critical thinking became a hallmark of Italian intellectual life. Here, amidst arches and ancient stone, Italy forged a tradition of scholarship and curiosity. A tradition that continues today, reminding the world that knowledge, like Italy itself, is built layer by layer, generation by generation. Before the unification of Italy in 1861, the peninsula was not a single nation, but a patchwork of over 30 independent states, each with its own prince, law, and customs. From the Duchy of Milan to the Republic of Venice, from the Kingdom of Sardinia to the Papal States, Italy existed more as a collection of competing identities than as a cohesive country. Travelers moving across these lands would have noticed striking differences. A coin acceptable in Florence might be worthless in Naples. The dialect in one town could render a visitor unintelligible in the next. City-states maintained armies, alliances, and courts, often maneuvering diplomatically or militarily against one another, while simultaneously trading goods, art, and ideas. Venice, for instance, thrived as a maritime republic, its canals bustling with merchants while political intrigue simmered behind the ornate palaces along the Grand Canal. Meanwhile, in the rugged hills of Tuscany, smaller territories resisted central control, cultivating local culture, festivals, and civic traditions. This fractured map created a world of opportunity and danger, of innovation and eccentricity. Artists, inventors, and thinkers moved fluidly between states, spreading Renaissance ideas across borders, while rulers competed to attract the most brilliant minds to their courts. Italy, despite, or perhaps because of, its chaos, became fertile ground for the explosion of culture and learning that would define the Renaissance era. The peninsula's patchwork of micro-states was both a puzzle and a proving ground, shaping a society where ambition, creativity, and cunning flourished in equal measure. It is difficult to imagine an Italy without forks, yet the adoption of this simple utensil was once met with scandal and moral panic. In the 11th century, a Byzantine princess, introduced the fork to Venice, presenting it as a refined tool for eating, particularly for avoiding contact with rich, oily foods. Religious authorities and traditionalists were outraged. The fork was labeled effeminate, unnatural, and even sinful. For decades, Italians continued to rely on their fingers and spoons for meals, twirling pasta and lifting food in ways that outsiders might find crude. In private, nobles experimented with forks, often hiding them from servants or guests for fear of ridicule. Over time, however, the fork slowly became accepted, first among the elite and eventually across the peninsula. This small object symbolizes Italy's complex relationship with innovation. Even the simplest invention could provoke debate, suspicion, and resistance. Yet eventually, necessity and elegance would prevail. The story of the fork also illustrates the Italian tendency to blend practicality with artistry. Today, dining in Italy is as much about ritual, gesture, and performance as it is about nourishment. From the medieval skepticism of the fork to modern culinary mastery, Italians have long treated meals as a stage and every utensil as a prop in the theater of daily life. Italy's history of invention often emerges not from noisy marketplaces or imperial workshops, but from places of silence. Among the most unexpected of these creations was the invention of eyeglasses, a tool now so ordinary that it seems almost natural, as though it had always belonged to the human face. Yet, in the late 13th century, somewhere in Italy, the first usable spectacles took shape, and the world of reading changed forever. One can imagine the setting with almost cinematic clarity. A monastery sits high in the hills, its stone walls cool against the heat of the afternoon. Inside, a monk bends over a manuscript in a dim chamber lit by an oil lamp. The lines on the page blur with age and strain. The letters, once sharp, now seem to dissolve into each other like mist over a valley. Then comes a small but miraculous correction. A pair of lenses, carefully shaped, held before the eyes. The page returns. The text becomes legible again. The sacred and the practical meet in one quiet gesture. That is the power of the Italian invention of eyeglasses. It did not arrive with trumpets or banners. It came as a modest instrument for human weakness, a way to extend the life of reading, scholarship, and devotion. Monks who had spent years copying texts by hand could continue their labor. Scholars could remain at their desks longer. Aging eyes no longer meant the end of learning. In a civilization that treasured manuscripts and scripture, the ability to see clearly was not a small convenience. It was a rescue. There is something especially fitting about this invention taking root in Italy. The peninsula had long been a place where thought and craft moved together. It was a land of artisans and priests, of builders and scribes, of people who understood that even the smallest object could alter the course of culture. Eyeglasses did exactly that. They helped preserve books, knowledge, and continuity. They allowed wisdom to pass more easily from one generation to the next. In that sense, the spectacles invented in medieval Italy were not only tools for sight, they were tools for memory. If eyeglasses rescued the eye, then Italian banking helped organize the world. Long before modern finance filled digital screens with numbers and markets, Italian merchants and bankers were inventing the machinery of trust itself. In the cities of Florence, Venice, and Genoa, wealth moved through narrow streets, across seas, and into counting houses where ledgers were balanced with extraordinary care. The modern language of banking, credit, deposit, exchange, accounting, branches. owes a great debt to Italy's commercial imagination. The scene is easy to picture. In a stone chamber lined with heavy wooden desks, a merchant counts coins beneath the gaze of ledgers written in ink. Across the room, another man writes a letter of credit, sending value across borders without moving sacks of gold. Elsewhere, a family office in Florence keeps its books in double entries, making profit and loss visible in an entirely new way. This was not merely commerce. It was a revolution in abstraction. The Italians of the Renaissance were teaching Europe that money did not need to stay still to be powerful. It could travel. It could represent promise. It could be calculated, insured, and transformed. This was one of Italy's quietest, but most world-changing achievements. Cathedrals and frescoes may draw more attention, but the banking houses of Renaissance Italy helped build the economic world that followed. They made possible long-distance trade, international borrowing, and the rise of merchant capitalism. They gave structure to ambition. They allowed commerce to grow beyond the limits of a single market or a single city. What makes this fact so outlandish is not simply that Italians helped invent modern banking, but that such a dry, technical system was born in such a dramatic place. The same land that produced opera, papal intrigue, and Renaissance art also produced the elegant mechanisms by which wealth could flow. In Italy, even finance became a form of artistry. Balance was not only a matter of arithmetic, it was a matter of style, intelligence, and nerve. When the Western Roman world began to fracture, many things seemed to be slipping into darkness. Armies moved, cities changed, institutions weakened. Yet in scattered monasteries across Italy, another kind of power quietly took hold. Monks, often working in mountain abbeys or secluded religious communities, began the painstaking work of preserving books. They copied ancient manuscripts line by line, letter by letter, in a labor so slow and so disciplined that it almost defies modern imagination. One can picture a scriptorium at dawn. Light filters through narrow windows. A monk sits at a desk with a quill in hand, his posture stooped, his concentration absolute. Beside him lie volumes of scripture, philosophy, poetry, and history. He copies not for fame nor for profit, but because knowledge is worth carrying through the storm. His fingers darken with ink, his eyes tire. Yet he continues, aware perhaps that he is preserving more than pages. He is preserving civilization's voice. This was one of Italy's great, hidden achievements. The men who worked in these monasteries were not warriors, kings, or conquerors. They were custodians. They guarded the words of the ancients through centuries of uncertainty. Without their labor, many classical works might have vanished entirely. Instead, they survived long enough to be rediscovered, studied, and admired by later ages. There is a deep irony in this story. Italy, the land that would one day be celebrated for Renaissance brilliance, first needed its own Dark Age guardians to keep the old world alive. The monks' work made the Renaissance possible. It gave later scholars the texts they needed to rebuild intellectual life. It ensured that Plato, Virgil, Cicero, and countless others would not be swallowed by time. This quiet act of preservation is outlandish not because it is strange, but because it is so easy to overlook. Grand empires leave monuments. Monks leave manuscripts. Yet the manuscripts may endure longer than the monuments. In the end, the library can outlast the palace. Italy understood this early, and the monks who copied by candlelight helped keep the future from forgetting the past. Before Pinocchio became a beloved book on shelves and a figure recognized around the world, he lived first as a newspaper creation, appearing in serialized form in a children's publication in 1881. That beginning gives the wooden puppet a strangely modern birth, as though he emerged not from an ancient folktale, but from the lively noise of print culture, ink, and daily readership. In the Italy of the late 19th century, when ideas moved faster than ever before through paper and press, Pinocchio stepped into public life chapter by chapter, his nose, his mischief, and his lessons arriving in installments like little shocks of imagination. One can imagine a child in a modest Italian household unfolding a weekly paper and finding, tucked among other tales and notices, the first signs of a puppet who wanted to become a boy. The room would have been simple: a wooden table, a window open to daylight, perhaps the scent of bread or dust in the air. Yet within those pages, a world of wonder unfolded. Geppetto's shop, the talking animals, the warnings, the lies, the transformations. All of it entered the world not as a finished monument, but as a serial surprise. That detail suits Italy perfectly. So much of Italian history arrives in fragments first, then grows into legend. The strange beauty of Pinocchio's origin lies in its contrast. A story now associated with childhood innocence and moral teaching was born in a newspaper, among the everyday rhythms of modern life. It is a reminder that Italy has never separated high culture from popular culture quite cleanly. The grand and the playful often meet there, and a story can begin in the columns of a children's periodical before becoming part of the cultural memory of the world. There is something almost unbelievable about the fact that tomatoes, so deeply tied to Italian cuisine in the modern imagination, were once strangers to Italy. Today they seem inseparable from the country's food identity, as if pasta, pizza, and tomatoes had always been bound together by fate. Yet the tomato arrived only after the great transatlantic exchanges of the 16th century. And for a long time, Italians looked at it with caution, curiosity, and even suspicion. The first tomatoes did not immediately become dinner. They appeared more like botanical curiosities than essential ingredients, a foreign novelty carried from the New World into a culinary world that did not yet know what to do with them. In some places, they were admired for their color. In others, they were studied as exotic specimens. And in many kitchens, they were ignored altogether. The transformation from unfamiliar fruit to national obsession took generations. Italians had to learn, slowly and experimentally, how to trust this bright red newcomer. It is easy now to imagine the first brave cooks who sliced a tomato or placed one on bread, as if testing a secret. Perhaps a woman in a sunlit kitchen in Naples or a farmer's wife in the countryside looked at the glossy skin and wondered what it might become when warmed in olive oil. Perhaps a man in a market stall tried it because the fruit looked too vivid to be left alone. Whatever the exact moment, it was not immediate. Italian cuisine did not spring fully formed from the earth with tomato sauce already in hand. It evolved, and the tomato's acceptance was part of that evolution. This delay gives Italian food history its own fascinating irony. Some of the country's most famous flavors are relatively young. The red sauce, the rich tomato base, the crowned pizza slice, all of them belong to a later Italy than many people assume. The result is a cuisine that feels ancient while being, in part, beautifully modern. In Italy, even the most familiar dish carries the memory of a time when its defining ingredient was still an outsider. Italy has always treated food and drink not only as nourishment, but as an expression of welcome. Few things reveal that spirit more vividly than the free wine fountain in Abruzzo, a place that sounds invented until one realizes it is entirely real. In a small village setting, wine flows from a public fountain, offered not as luxury, but as hospitality, as though the landscape itself has decided to pour out generosity in liquid form. The image is delightful. A traveler arriving dusty and tired, a pilgrim on the road, or a curious visitor pausing in front of stone and water. Instead of the usual fountain's cold, clear stream, there is wine, deep-colored, fragrant, and ceremonial. It turns an ordinary civic feature into something almost theatrical. Water is practical. Wine is celebratory. And when the two worlds of the fountain and the vineyard meet, the result feels almost like a medieval dream made real in the modern day. This is not a story of excess alone. It is a story of identity. Wine in Italy has never been merely a drink. It is tied to agriculture, family, ritual, and place. A wine fountain suggests that the country's relationship with its own traditions is so deep that they can spill into the public square without losing meaning. The fountain does not mock the past. It honors it. It says that abundance, when rooted in community, can be shared openly. There is something wonderfully Italian about that gesture. Rather than hiding wine behind walls or reserving it for ceremony, the fountain turns it into a small public marvel. It invites the passerby to pause, smile, and remember that in Italy, even everyday life can feel like folklore. A fountain that pours wine is not just a novelty. It is a declaration that history, land, and generosity can still meet in the open air. Pizza, as the world knows it, was born not in a grand Italian capital, but in the bustling streets of Naples. Long before the unification of Italy, Naples was a city of narrow alleys, smoky ovens, and street vendors catering to the working poor. It was here, amid the hum of daily life, that flatbreads topped with simple ingredients, tomato, olive oil, cheese, first became the food we now associate with an entire nation. Picture a sun-drenched Neapolitan street in the late 18th century. Smoke curls from brick ovens, mingling with the scent of fresh bread and the briny aroma of the nearby sea. Children dart between stalls. Vendors shout, tossing dough high into the air, shaping it with practiced skill. Tomatoes, still relatively new to Italian cuisine, provide a brilliant red splash against the golden dough. Cheese melts slowly, bubbling in the warmth. The pizza is humble, fast, nourishing. But in its simplicity, it carries the promise of something enduring, a culinary emblem that would eventually spread far beyond Italy's borders. The story of pizza highlights Italy's regional diversity. While today it represents a national identity, its origins are intensely local. Naples, with its chaotic charm, poverty, and creativity, gave the world an invention so simple yet so transformative that it transcends geography. The pizza, like Italy itself, reminds us that greatness often arises from modest, overlooked places. In the pantheon of Italian culinary wonders, tiramisu stands out not only for its flavor, but for its surprising youth. Unlike pasta or wine, which trace back centuries, tiramisu is a product of the 1960s. Its layered combination of coffee-soaked ladyfingers, mascarpone, and cocoa feels timeless. Yet it is distinctly modern. A dessert born in a post-war Italy eager to embrace both tradition and innovation. One can imagine the first chefs experimenting in dimly lit kitchens. Bowls of mascarpone sit beside espresso cups, the bitter aroma mingling with sugar and cocoa. Carefully, layers are constructed, then chilled, creating a dessert that is at once soft, bitter, sweet, and intoxicatingly smooth. Patrons taste it and marvel. It tastes like something they have always known, yet it has never existed before. This paradox is central to Italian culinary identity. A deep reverence for the past coexisting with a fearless embrace of the new. Tiramisu's story emphasizes the continued evolution of Italian culture. Italy is not static. Even iconic dishes can be invented anew, reflecting shifting tastes, regional creativity, and a society constantly in dialogue with itself. It is a reminder that Italian history, whether in food or in politics, thrives on invention that feels at once surprising and inevitable. Rome's Trevi fountain, a masterpiece of Baroque artistry, conceals a daily ritual of wealth and superstition. Each day, roughly 3,000 euros in coins are thrown into its waters by visitors making wishes, pledging love, or hoping for fortune. The fountain is more than a monument. It is an intersection of art, ritual, and human hope. Imagine the scene in the early morning, before the crowds gather. The water shimmers under dawn light, spilling from carved statues into a basin sculpted with grandeur and imagination. The coins lie on the fountain floor, their clinking echoing faintly in the cavernous urban space. As tourists arrive, eager hands toss more coins, each arc of metal accompanied by whispered words, laughter, or private contemplation. In the flicker of sunlight on water and bronze, the Trevi fountain becomes a theater of human aspiration, as timeless and alive as the city itself. The coins are collected and used for charitable work, a small but potent reminder that even luxury and spectacle in Italy are often married to generosity. The fountain embodies the Italian ability to blend beauty, ritual, and practicality, a living artwork that interacts with society every day. It is a place where history, superstition, and public life converge. Each coin a tiny story sinking beneath the surface, yet perpetually part of a larger narrative. In Italy, coffee is more than a beverage. It is a cultural ritual, a language of daily life, and a marker of time. One of the quirks that fascinates visitors is the strict rule regarding cappuccino. Italians generally do not drink it after 11 a.m. While foreigners may find this surprising, for locals, it is a matter of culinary propriety, rooted in centuries of dietary habits and the rhythm of meals. Imagine a sunlit Roman cafe in the morning. Steam rises from cups of espresso and cappuccino alike, mingling with the aroma of fresh pastries. Patrons linger at tables, chatting or reading newspapers, savoring the frothy richness that signals the start of the day. By late morning, the baristas shift focus. Espresso remains acceptable throughout the day, strong and compact. But the milk-laden cappuccino is deemed too heavy after the morning hour. The rule is as much about digestion as it is about tradition. To drink a cappuccino after 11 is almost like challenging the order of life itself, an indulgence out of step with the natural rhythm of Italian daily existence. This practice reflects Italy's precise attention to ritual, taste, and timing. Food and drink are never purely functional. They are an art form, a social cue, and a marker of identity. The cappuccino rule, playful as it may seem to outsiders, is a subtle reminder that Italian culture measures life with care, defining each hour by its proper indulgences. Italians have a unique approach to dining that can puzzle travelers. The salad often comes at the end of a meal rather than the beginning. This inversion of expectation is rooted in tradition, taste, and the careful orchestration of flavors. A meal is designed to progress, each dish following another to balance richness and refreshment. Picture a dinner table in Tuscany. The first course arrives: pasta, risotto, or soup, warm and aromatic. Then, a meat or fish course, savory and satisfying, accompanied by wine. Only after these flavors have passed does the salad appear, crisp and lightly dressed, cleansing the palate and signaling closure. Eating in this order is an act of sensory orchestration, a way to respect ingredients, time, and digestion. the salad is not an appetizer, but a punctuation mark, a final flourish that completes the narrative of the meal. This custom demonstrates Italy's attention to rhythm, balance, and aesthetics. Meals are not hurried. They are composed, staged, and experienced. Each course has its purpose and its place. Even something as seemingly simple as salad becomes part of a larger story, reinforcing the Italian dedication to precision, elegance, and the artistry of daily life. Italy's 20th century history is filled with dramatic twists, none more startling than its tendency to switch allegiances during both World War I and World War II. In the first conflict, Italy initially sided with the Central Powers due to its alliance commitments, only to later join the Entente in pursuit of territorial promises. In World War II, Italy began as an Axis power under Mussolini, but eventually shifted after internal upheaval and Allied advances, dramatically altering the course of the war in southern Europe. The human drama of these decisions is palpable. Soldiers marched into battles under one banner, then faced the consequences of political change that forced them to fight alongside former enemies. Civilians experienced shifting loyalties, occupation, and liberation, often within the same year. Cities bore the scars of uncertainty, while Italian leaders negotiated and maneuvered with the stakes of survival, pride, and ambition. These reversals illustrate Italy's complex relationship with power, geography, and history. Positioned at the heart of the Mediterranean, the peninsula is a crossroads, a place where strategy, diplomacy, and circumstance collide. Italy's wartime pivots reflect both vulnerability and adaptability, demonstrating a nation navigating global pressures while retaining its own identity and agency. The story of Italy switching sides is not only a historical fact, but a vivid portrait of political tension, human courage, and the unpredictable rhythms of national destiny. Italy's 20th century history contains moments of the surreal, none more curious than the renaming of iconic American cartoon characters under Benito Mussolini's regime. Mickey Mouse, known worldwide, became Topolino, while Donald Duck was called Paperino. This was not simply a linguistic choice. It was part of a broader campaign to assert Italian identity and cultural sovereignty, even in the realm of playful, imported entertainment. Imagine Italian children of the 1930s reading newspapers or comic strips. The familiar adventures of Mickey and Donald were recontextualized. Familiar faces, now speaking Italian names, navigating worlds slightly reframed by a government that sought to mold even leisure into a tool of nationalism. The renaming reflects both the whimsy and the absurdity of Italy's social experiments during that period. Parents might smile at the change, while officials praised the cultural adjustment. This episode is emblematic of Italy's peculiar blend of creativity and authority. Even under authoritarian rule, humor, play, and cultural imagination persisted, but they were filtered through the lens of identity and control. The whimsical renaming reminds us that Italian history often moves between the grandiose and the absurd, where politics, culture, and imagination intersect in ways that surprise even the most attentive observer. Within the heart of Rome lies a world of astonishing paradox. Vatican City, the smallest country in the world. Enclosed within Italy's bustling capital, it occupies only 44 hectares, yet wields influence far beyond its borders. It is the spiritual center of Catholicism, a place where religious authority, art, and politics converge, all within a microcosm of walls, courtyards, and monumental architecture. The streets of Rome bustle with cars, scooters, and pedestrians. Yet stepping through a gate into the Vatican is like entering a different universe. St. Peter's Basilica towers overhead. The Sistine Chapel glimmers with Michelangelo's brushstrokes. Security is quiet but strict. Guards in Renaissance-style uniforms move with a stately precision, their presence both ceremonial and protective. The paradox is striking. A nation so small that it could be crossed in minutes contains treasures and influence rivaling those of entire empires. Vatican City embodies Italy's talent for blending scale and significance. In a country of sprawling landscapes, mountain ranges, and ancient cities, the world's tiniest nation proves that size is not the measure of power, impact, or legacy. Within its walls, history, religion, and art coexist, offering a concentrated portrait of the cultural and spiritual energy that has defined Italy for centuries. Soccer, or calcio, as it is known in Italy, was not always the passionate national obsession it is today. Introduced by British expatriates in the late 19th century, it initially held limited appeal. The sport spread slowly, played in schools and local clubs, far from the mass fervor that would later define stadiums across Italy. Mussolini recognized the potential of the game as a tool of national unity and pride. Under his regime, soccer transformed into more than a pastime. It became a stage for demonstrating strength, discipline, and Italian identity. Stadiums filled with spectators who cheered not just for their teams, but for the idea of Italy itself. Clubs like Juventus, AC Milan, and Inter Milan grew into symbols of regional prowess, yet the national team's victories were framed as triumphs for the entire peninsula. The story of soccer in Italy is emblematic of the nation's ability to take foreign ideas and transform them into something distinctly Italian. The sport's rapid evolution, from British import to patriotic spectacle, demonstrates a broader pattern in Italian history: the assimilation and reimagining of external influences, producing outcomes that are simultaneously local, creative, and intensely meaningful. Italy's landscape is as dramatic as its history, and nowhere is this more apparent than in its active volcanoes. Etna, Stromboli, and Vesuvius loom over the land, reminding residents and visitors alike that beneath Italy's beauty lies a restless molten force. Each volcano tells a story of creation, destruction, and human resilience, shaping the culture and daily life of nearby communities for centuries. Mount Vesuvius, infamous for burying Pompeii in 79 CE, stands as both a historical warning and a living presence. Its slopes, dotted with vineyards and towns, hold echoes of tragedy and survival. Families grow olives and grapes, aware that beneath their feet, the earth is never entirely still. Etna, Europe's tallest active volcano, dominates Sicily with a constantly changing profile of smoke and lava, influencing weather, soil fertility, and even local mythology. Stromboli, small yet volatile, glows at night like a distant hearth, erupting rhythmically in a display that has fascinated sailors and scientists for centuries. Italy's volcanoes are a testament to adaptation. Generations have learned to live with unpredictability, building settlements, agriculture, and traditions around the ever-present threat of fire. They shape not only the land, but also the imagination. Artists, poets, and writers have long used the imagery of eruption and lava as metaphors for passion, destruction, and renewal. In Italy, the raw forces of nature are inseparable from human history, a constant reminder that the land itself participates in the story of civilization. While Italy is celebrated for its centuries-old monuments, it is also a land of modern engineering triumphs. The Gotthard-based tunnel, connecting Switzerland to Italy, stretches 57 kilometers beneath the Alps, representing one of the longest and deepest tunnels in the world. It is a feat of precision, planning, and human perseverance, linking northern Europe to the Italian peninsula in a way unimaginable to medieval travelers. Construction was a spectacle of ambition and risk. Engineers and workers tunneled through granite, water, and unpredictable subterranean layers, guided by lasers, drilling machines, and meticulous planning. The rhythm of hammering, drilling, and machinery mingled with the hum of human determination. For travelers today, a train passing through the tunnel offers an almost silent glide beneath mountains that have long symbolized both challenge and boundary. The tunnel illustrates Italy's enduring ability to blend practicality and vision. Just as Roman roads once connected vast territories, modern infrastructure links Italy to the wider continent. The Gotthard base tunnel is more than a technical achievement. It is a statement of continuity, a modern reflection of the same ambition, ingenuity, and daring that shaped the Roman Empire, the Renaissance, and beyond. Venice, a city famed for canals, bridges, and Renaissance architecture, is perpetually negotiating with water. The phenomenon of acqua alta, or high water, transforms streets into temporary canals, compelling Venetians and visitors alike to navigate elevated walkways and planks, while the lagoon creeps into piazzas and alleyways. Imagine the city at sunrise. The reflection of centuries-old palaces shimmers across shallow pools. Wooden platforms rise above the water like narrow bridges, leading pedestrians safely past submerged streets. Boats glide silently beneath bridges, carrying residents to shops, schools, and offices. Life continues, defying the persistent threat of flooding. The city's architecture, planning, and culture have evolved alongside these rhythms. Elevated squares, waterproofed foundations, and careful engineering are not merely practical. They are a dialogue with nature, a recognition that Venice's beauty is inseparable from its aquatic environment. This dance with water is both poetic and practical, emblematic of Italy's approach to adaptation and ingenuity. Venice survives and thrives precisely because its inhabitants respect, anticipate, and creatively respond to the forces around them. The city, like Italy itself, blends elegance, resilience, and innovation into a living, breathing story of survival. Italy, more than almost any other country, exists in layers of time, each layer strange, vivid, and alive. From the cow-herding Italus who lent his name to the peninsula, to the carefully orchestrated rituals of cappuccino consumption, the nation has cultivated a unique blend of invention, audacity, and whimsy. Walking through Italy is to navigate a dialogue between centuries. The ghosts of Roman gladiators, Renaissance scholars, and mischievous Pinocchio characters mingle with the hum of scooters, the clatter of espresso cups, and the glint of Venetian canals. Consider the daily rituals that feel both ordinary and extraordinary. Tourists toss coins into the Trevi fountain, unknowingly continuing a ritual that mixes superstition, generosity, and spectacle. Locals drink espresso standing at counters, never breaking the centuries-old rhythm of Italian life. The streets of Naples, Florence, and Rome conceal ancient ruins beneath asphalt, whispering that the past is never truly gone. Even modern feats like the Gotthard base tunnel echo the ambition of Roman engineers while carving a path into the future. Italy's eccentricity also extends to the culinary realm. Dishes that feel timeless, like pizza or tiramisu, are surprisingly young, invented in the bustling streets or kitchens of Naples and Veneto, reflecting the country's ability to transform novelty into tradition. Ingredients that define its cuisine, tomatoes, coffee, mascarpone, were once foreign, strange, or even suspect. Yet Italy absorbed them, made them its own, and produced flavors so powerful and iconic that they now seem eternal. In Italy, Innovation is inseparable from reverence for history. The new and the ancient coexist, sometimes in contrast, sometimes in harmony, but always in dialogue. History itself in Italy is layered with paradox. Rome, the eternal city, was founded by twins suckled by a wolf, a legend that blends myth with civic identity. Julius Caesar reshaped the calendar, yet was assassinated not in the Senate, but in a theater lobby. Venice survives as a city built on water, a marvel of adaptation that dances perpetually with the lagoon's rhythm. Mussolini renamed cartoon characters while championing soccer as a tool of national identity. In each of these stories, one sees Italy's capacity for blending the practical, the symbolic, and the absurd. Even Italy's small corners are extraordinary. Vatican City, a nation smaller than most city blocks, exerts global influence. The wine fountain in Caldari di Ortona flows generosity freely into the streets. Mountain monasteries preserve the Western canon through centuries of upheaval. Italy's eccentricities are not anomalies. They are expressions of a civilization that delights in contrasts. Grand yet intimate, serious yet playful, monumental yet absurd. Perhaps what ties these 30 oddities together is the same force that has propelled Italy through millennia, a willingness to embrace life in all its contradictions. Civilization, art, religion, cuisine, politics, and invention intertwine seamlessly, producing a culture where even the most ordinary act, a sip of espresso, a toss of a coin, a slice of pizza, carries resonance across time. Italy is a living museum, a theater, a laboratory, and a playground simultaneously. It is a place where myths are real, legends are practical, and the past and present are never truly separate. In these eccentricities, one finds the essence of Italy, a nation that refuses to be ordinary, that celebrates the unusual, and that reminds the world that history is most vivid when it surprises, delights, and occasionally bewilders. To leave Italy's history at any single moment is to do it injustice. The peninsula is a living tapestry stitched together from myth, invention, artistry, and the sheer unpredictability of human ambition. The 30 oddities explored here are not mere curiosities. They are threads in the broader fabric of a civilization that has always danced between the ordinary and the extraordinary, the practical and the fantastical. Italy's charm lies in its ability to surprise, to delight, and to challenge expectations. From the very beginning, Italy's story was set apart by the strange and the remarkable. The land itself, named for Italis and calf land, reflects a pastoral simplicity that belies the complex societies it would host. Rome, founded by twins suckled by a wolf, was never destined to be mundane. The Colosseum opened with 100 days of games, animals, and gladiators, embodying the spectacle and excess that became synonymous with the empire. Julius Caesar, the man who reshaped calendars and history alike, met his end not in the Senate, but in a theater lobby, reminding us that even the greatest figures can be caught in the theater of unpredictability. Beneath modern streets, underground ruins testify that Italy's past is never far from the present. History surfaces unexpectedly in fragments that hint at layers of forgotten lives, battles, and ideas. The Middle Ages and Renaissance only amplified this eccentricity. The University of Bologna, founded in 1088, transformed the pursuit of knowledge into a structured yet living enterprise. Italy was not a unified nation, but a patchwork of micro-states, each with its own customs, laws, and dialects, cultivating a society in which diversity thrived and innovation flourished. Monks invented eyeglasses in quiet chambers, allowing scholars to continue their work and preserving knowledge for future generations. Italians invented modern banking, a system of abstraction and trust that allowed commerce to transcend borders. And yet, even amid these feats, playful oddities persisted. Pinocchio debuted in a children's newspaper, hinting that storytelling in Italy often moved with whimsy as much as purpose. Italian cuisine mirrors this duality of tradition and novelty. Tomatoes, once foreign and feared, became the cornerstone of beloved dishes. Pizza was born in Naples' alleys long before national identity existed. Tiramisu, deceptively modern, arrived in the 1960s to captivate palates with layers of coffee and mascarpone, demonstrating that culinary innovation is as central to Italian history as political maneuvering or artistic brilliance. The Trevi fountain collects daily offerings of €3,000, a modern ritual echoing centuries of superstition and devotion. Cappuccinos are strictly breakfast drinks, and salad often concludes the meal rather than beginning it. A small but vivid example of the Italian preoccupation with ritual, rhythm, and balance. The 20th century carried forward Italy's tradition of eccentricity and adaptability. The country switched sides in both world wars, balancing ambition, survival, and political reality. Mussolini's regime renamed Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck, bending even popular culture to national identity. Soccer, introduced by the British, became a tool of unity, spectacle, and pride. Vatican City, tiny in physical scale yet vast in spiritual and cultural reach, exists as a world within a city, a paradox of influence compressed into 44 hectares. Italy's relationship with nature is equally dramatic. 3 active volcanoes, Vesuvius, Etna, and Stromboli, remind inhabitants of the land's volatility, shaping agriculture, settlement, and myth. Venice's walking platforms rise above the Acqua Alta, a daily negotiation with water that has shaped urban design and daily life for centuries. And in the modern era, feats like the Gotthard base tunnel link Italy to Europe with technological elegance, echoing the ambition of Roman roads while demonstrating contemporary ingenuity. What unites all of these facts is Italy's enduring capacity to blend the practical with the poetic. The peninsula is a place where everyday life becomes art. Coins tossed into fountains tell stories of hope. Meals are carefully orchestrated symphonies of flavor and timing. Even the smallest invention, whether eyeglasses, forks, or banking systems, carries profound cultural significance. Italy thrives in contrasts. Small and mighty, serious and playful, ancient and modern, local and global. It is a country where absurdity, ingenuity, devotion, and flair coexist seamlessly, giving every corner a sense of narrative, drama, and surprise. Italy's eccentricities also reveal its profound adaptability. Across centuries of invasions, political turmoil, and social change, the nation absorbed external influences and transformed them. British soccer became Italian calcio. New World tomatoes became the backbone of iconic dishes. Foreign manuscripts were meticulously copied and preserved by monks. Italy's genius lies not in isolation, but in its ability to engage with the world, reinterpret it, and make it distinctly its own. Walking through Italy is, in a sense, walking through a story that has been centuries in the making. The ghosts of Roman emperors mingle with the laughter of children in piazzas. Renaissance scholars whisper through frescoed halls. Chefs, artists, and engineers contribute in small and monumental ways to a living tradition. History is tangible. In the layers beneath streets, in the arcs of fountains, in the rhythm of meals, in the terraces above volcanic slopes. Eccentricity is everywhere, but it is never frivolous. Each oddity, each peculiar custom Each outlandish fact contributes to the Italian identity, binding together past, present, and imagination. Ultimately, Italy is a testament to the richness of human experience. It celebrates paradox, embraces unpredictability, and elevates the ordinary into spectacle. From the mythic founding of Rome to the hand-assembled engines of Ferrari, from clandestine manuscript copying to cappuccino etiquette, the country exemplifies the extraordinary embedded in the everyday. Its history is a mosaic of surprises, and its culture is a living reminder that the world need not be mundane. Italy invites us to witness life in full color, in all its chaos, creativity, and charm. Its 30 outlandish facts, whether cultural, historical, culinary, or geological, are threads in a vast, intricate tapestry, woven over millennia with audacity, elegance, and imagination. To explore Italy is to enter a story that is never fully finished, one that challenges the ordinary and celebrates the eccentric, one that whispers continually that history is most compelling when it surprises, delights, and above all, endures. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this journey into the past, be sure to like the video, share it with fellow history enthusiasts, and subscribe for more deep dives into the people, civilizations, battles, myths, and moments that shaped our world. Leave your thoughts and theories in the comments below. Your perspective might inspire a future video. Until next time, keep exploring history, because the past is never truly gone.